Spring is when the body wants to reset. After months of heavier food, less movement, and shorter days, the physiological shift that happens in March and April is real. Energy changes, digestion adjusts, mood fluctuates, and the immune system transitions out of its winter configuration. Traditional medicine systems across cultures recognize this seasonal shift and developed specific plant-based responses to support it. What they reached for were not random remedies, but specific herbs with specific effects on the organs and systems most active in spring transition. These 15 medicinal herbs are what spring calls for, and most of them can be grown in a pot on a doorstep, a small garden bed, or a sunny windowsill. Stinging nettle is pulled from gardens and roadsides across most of the temperate world without most people realizing they are discarding one of the most nutritionally and medicinally significant plants in their immediate environment. The mineral content alone separates nettle from virtually everything else that grows wild in a temperate climate. Per gram of dry weight, nettle contains more iron than spinach, more calcium than dairy products, and a spectrum of trace minerals, magnesium, potassium, silica, that reflect the plant's capacity to draw nutrients from deep in the soil through its extensive root system. Spring nettles, harvested before the plant flowers and before the leaves develop the compounds that reduce palatability, are the most potent the plant produces all year. The medicinal research on nettle covers several distinct applications. For allergic rhinitis, the seasonal sneezing, itching, and congestion that spring triggers in a significant portion of the population, freeze-dried nettle leaf has shown results comparable to antihistamine medications in at least one randomized controlled trial with a mechanism involving inhibition of pro-inflammatory cytokines rather than receptor blocking. For joint inflammation, nettle's ability to reduce inflammatory markers through multiple pathways has been documented in both animal and human research. For kidney support, the diuretic action of nettle leaf tea has been used in European herbal medicine for centuries and is now supported by enough pharmacological data to appear in the German Commission e-monographs, one of the most rigorous herbal medicine regulatory frameworks in the world. Harvesting spring nettles requires gloves, but cooking, drying, or blending the leaves neutralizes the formic acid in the stinging hairs completely and safely. Nettle soup, nettle tea, and dried nettle capsules are the three most practical applications for home harvesters. The plant that most gardeners spend energy removing is, by several nutritional and medicinal measures, the most valuable thing growing in the spring garden. And what doesn't spend any energy is subscribing to our channel to help us grow. Dandelion's medicinal reputation has been obscured by its weed reputation so thoroughly that most people treat it as a problem to eliminate rather than a resource to use. Every part of the dandelion plant is medicinally active, and the parts active in spring are specifically aligned with what the body needs at that time of year. The leaves, harvested young before the plant flowers, are bitter in a therapeutic sense. The bitterness stimulates bile production, supports liver function, and activates the digestive enzymes that winter's heavier dietary patterns have allowed to become sluggish. The leaves are also diuretic, mineral-rich, and contain significant quantities of vitamins A, C, and K, a nutritional profile that rivals any cultivated salad green. The root tells a different story. Dandelion root contains inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds the bifidobacterium and lactobacillus populations in the gut microbiome. The microbiome shifts that occur between winter and spring are among the least discussed and most physiologically significant seasonal transitions the body makes, and supporting the gut bacteria that thrive in a spring dietary pattern is one of the most practical things a person can do in March and April. Research on dandelion root's hepatoprotective effects, its ability to support liver cell function and normalize elevated liver enzymes, has produced results significant enough to generate clinical interest in populations with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The mechanism involves the root's ability to stimulate bile flow and support phase 2 liver detoxification pathways. The most practical approach to spring dandelion use is to harvest young leaves for salads and tea, dig roots from plants in their second year or older for drying and decoction, and treat the spring lawn dandelion harvest as a crop rather than a cleanup task. A yard full of dandelions in April is not a maintenance failure. It is a harvest waiting to happen from one of the most thoroughly documented medicinal plants in European and Native American botanical traditions. Lemon balm's association with anxiety and nervous system support is old enough to appear in the writings of Paracelsus and Avicenna, both of whom prescribed it for what they described as the spirits of the heart, a pre-modern vocabulary for the mood and emotional regulation that modern medicine attributes to the nervous system. Spring is a seasonally appropriate time for lemon balm for a specific physiological reason. The transition from winter's shorter days to spring's lengthening light triggers shifts in cortisol rhythms, melatonin production, and serotonin availability that many people experience as heightened anxiety, irritability, or disturbed sleep during March and April, even without any obvious external stressor. Lemon balm addresses this transition through its primary active compounds, rosmarinic acid and a group of volatile terpenoids, which have documented inhibitory effects on the enzyme that breaks down GABA, the brain's primary calming neurotransmitter. A study published in the journal Nutrients demonstrated significant reductions in anxiety scores and sleep disturbance in participants taking standardized lemon balm extract over a 15-day period, with effects visible within the first week of use. The plant itself is one of the easiest medicinal herbs to establish. It grows vigorously in partial shade, one of the few medicinal herbs that doesn't require full sun, spreads readily through self-seeding, and once planted, tends to persist in a garden indefinitely without attention. The fresh leaves used as tea, or tinctured in vodka at a 1:5 ratio, produce the most therapeutically active preparations. Dried lemon balm loses a significant proportion of its volatile compounds within a few months of harvest, which is one reason growing it fresh is preferable to purchasing dried preparations that may have been sitting in supply chains for a year. Lemon balm planted in spring and used fresh through the growing season is one of the most accessible and evidence-supported botanical tools for managing the nervous system disruption that seasonal transition reliably produces. Elderflower occupies a different medicinal space than elderberry, the fall berry harvest that most people associate with the elder plant, and spring is the only window in which it's available. The flowers of Sambucus nigra and Sambucus canadensis appear in late spring, typically May through June depending on zone, and remain harvestable for only 2 to 3 weeks before they set into berries. The medicinal compounds in elderflower are distinct from those in the berry. The flowers are rich in flavonoids, rutin, quercetin, and camphorol, with documented anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antihistamine activity that makes them specifically useful for the respiratory and sinus issues that spring allergies produce. European herbal tradition used elderflower tea as a standard spring remedy for the congestion, sinus pressure, and lingering respiratory complaints that transition out of winter and peak with the arrival of pollen season. The preparation is straightforward. Fresh or dried flower heads steeped in hot water for 10 minutes produce a light floral tea that is genuinely pleasant to drink as a daily spring beverage. Elderflower cordial, made by infusing the flowers in a sugar syrup with lemon, is one of the great traditional spring preparations of European food culture and delivers the same flavonoid content in a form that preserves well and dilutes into a daily drink through the early summer. The plant that produced the elderflower is the same one that will produce elderberries in August and September, making it one of the highest value medicinal plants available to anyone with space for a shrub. Elderflower harvested in the 2 to 3 week spring window and preserved as tea, tincture, or cordial provides a medicinal resource that supports the respiratory and immune challenges of the most allergically demanding season of the year. Calendula's medicinal significance is concentrated in its flowers, the resin-rich, bright orange and yellow blooms that the plant produces continuously from early summer through the first hard frost. Starting calendula from seed in spring produces a plant that begins flowering in 6 to 8 weeks and doesn't stop until cold shuts it down, making a single spring sowing one of the most productive medicinal plantings per unit of effort available to any home grower. The flower's active compounds, triterpenoid, saponins, flavonoids, and carotenoids, have been researched extensively for their effects on wound healing, skin inflammation, and mucosal tissue repair. Calendula-infused oil, made by packing fresh or dried flowers into a jar of olive oil and leaving it in a warm location for 4 to 6 weeks, produces one of the most versatile topical preparations in botanical medicine. Applied to dry, cracked, or irritated skin, conditions that winter commonly produces and spring aggravates during the transition to outdoor activity, calendula oil reduces inflammation, accelerates healing, and provides antimicrobial protection simultaneously. Research published in the Journal of Clinical Oncology documented calendula cream outperforming trolamine, the standard pharmaceutical preparation, in reducing radiation dermatitis in breast cancer patients, which provides a sense of the potency involved. For internal use, calendula tea has documented anti-inflammatory and mucous membrane soothing effects that make it useful for the digestive irritation and mild immune challenges of seasonal transition. Calendula grown from a spring sowing and harvested consistently, the more it's picked, the more it produces, provides both a topical and internal medicinal resource that covers a significant range of spring health needs from a single plant. Tulsi, holy basil, Ocimum tenuiflorum, requires warm soil to establish, making spring planting the only practical window for capturing a full season of leaf harvest. Unlike culinary basil, which is bred for flavor compounds that make it valuable in cooking, Tulsi has been selected over 3,000 years of cultivation for its medicinal properties, specifically its adaptogenic effects on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that governs the body's stress response. The clinical research on Tulsi is specific enough to be useful. A randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine documented significant reductions in stress, anxiety, and cognitive function impairment in participants taking standardized Tulsi extract over 6 weeks, with effects visible across multiple measurement scales. The mechanism involves the plant's eugenol, rosmarinic acid, and a group of triterpene compounds that together modulate cortisol production, reduce inflammatory cytokines, and support immune function without stimulating it beyond healthy baseline levels. Spring is also a season when the body's adaptogenic needs are elevated. The physiological adjustments required by changing light, temperature, and activity patterns place real demands on the adrenal system, and an herb that specifically supports that system's capacity to manage those demands is well matched to the season. 3 distinct varieties of Tulsi carry slightly different compound profiles and flavors. Vana, Tulsi is the most vigorous and has the lightest, most pleasant flavor for tea. Rama Tulsi has a clove-like note from higher eugenol content. Krishna Tulsi is the most peppery and most traditional in Indian ceremonial use. Growing all 3 and blending the dried leaves produces a tea that covers the full spectrum of Tulsi's medicinal profile. A Tulsi plant started in spring and harvested consistently through summer produces enough dried leaf material to supply a daily medicinal tea through the following winter from a single pot on a sunny doorstep. Echinacea is the medicinal herb that requires the most patience and rewards that patience most generously. A plant started from seed in spring will spend its first year producing little above ground while establishing the root system that will make it productive for the next 15 to 20 years. The medicinal value of Echinacea is concentrated in the root, specifically in the alkylamides and polysaccharides that stimulate innate immune function. And a root worth harvesting takes 3 years of growth to develop. What this means practically is that an Echinacea planting is a long-term medicinal investment rather than an immediate resource. From year 1, the leaves and flowers are medicinally active and harvestable, though less potent than the root. By year 3, a plant produces enough root material to harvest sustainably while leaving the plant intact. By year 5, the planting has become a permanent medicinal fixture that requires essentially no management and produces every year without replanting. The research on Echinacea purpurea, the easiest species to grow and the most extensively studied, shows consistent results across multiple clinical trials. Reduction in both the frequency and duration of upper respiratory infections, with effects most pronounced when use begins at the first sign of symptoms rather than as a continuous preventative. The distinction matters because continuous daily use appears to reduce the immune-stimulating response over time, while short-course use at the onset of illness produces the most reliable results. Echinacea planted in spring is not a resource for this year's cold season. It is the beginning of a 20-year medicinal relationship with the most clinically researched immune-supporting herb in Western botanical medicine. Ashwagandha's growing requirements make spring planting non-negotiable for anyone who wants a fall root harvest. The root, which contains the withanolides responsible for the plant's adaptogenic, thyroid-supporting, and cortisol-regulating effects, needs a full growing season of warm weather to develop meaningful medicinal potency. In most of North America, that means starting seeds indoors in early spring and transplanting after the last frost, giving the root 6 months of growth before harvest in October or November when the aerial parts begin to die back. The commercial supplement market for ashwagandha has expanded dramatically over the past decade, but the quality and potency of commercial products varies enormously. Homegrown ashwagandha root, harvested at the right stage and properly dried, produces material with relied concentrations that frequently exceed what independent testing finds in commercial products, and the cost comparison, a few dollars in seeds versus $30 to $60 per month for quality supplements, makes home growing one of the more economically significant decisions in a medicinal garden. Multiple randomized controlled trials have confirmed ashwagandha's effects on perceived stress, cortisol levels, thyroid function in subclinical hypothyroidism, and male reproductive hormone balance. The breadth of documented effects reflects the adaptogen classification. Rather than pushing one specific system in one direction, the plant helps multiple systems find their appropriate baseline under stress conditions. Ashwagandha, started from seed in spring and harvested in fall, provides a year's supply of one of the most clinically validated adaptogens in natural medicine at a fraction of the commercial cost, from a plant that asks only for warmth, reasonable drainage, and time. Chamomile is one of the most extensively researched medicinal plants in the world, and the gap between how casually most people use it, a tea bag from the grocery store steeped for 2 minutes before bed, and what the plant is actually capable of when used properly is significant. German chamomile's primary active compound, apigenin, binds to GABA-A receptors in the brain with a specificity that pharmacological research has measured directly, the same receptor site targeted by benzodiazepine medications used for anxiety and sleep disorders. Multiple randomized controlled trials have documented chamomile's effects on generalized anxiety disorder, with results in some trials comparable to low-dose pharmaceutical anxiolytics, and a safety profile that pharmaceutical alternatives cannot match for long-term use. Beyond its nervous system effects, chamomile's bisabolol and chamazoline content produces documented antispasmodic action on the smooth muscle lining the digestive tract, a mechanism that explains its effectiveness for the cramping, bloating, and digestive disruption that stress and dietary changes in spring commonly produce. The inflammation-reducing properties of these same compounds extend to topical applications. Chamomile cream has been compared favorably to hydrocortisone in clinical research for mild skin inflammation, and the wound-healing effects of chamomile preparations have been documented in post-surgical wound care studies. Spring planting produces summer flowers, the medicinally active part of the plant, over a harvest window that can extend from June through September with consistent picking. Dried properly, those flowers retain their medicinal potency for 12 to 18 months, producing a year-round supply of genuine therapeutic material rather than the diluted commercial product that most grocery store chamomile tea represents. German chamomile self-seeds so reliably once established that a first-year planting typically becomes a self-sustaining colony by year 2, appearing each spring without any replanting effort. Chamomile grown from a spring sowing and harvested consistently through summer produces a medicinal resource that addresses the anxiety, digestive disruption, and skin challenges of seasonal transition from a plant that essentially takes over its own perpetuation once it's been introduced to a garden. Milk thistle is the liver herb that spring calls for more specifically than any other season, and the reasoning behind that alignment is grounded in both traditional and modern understanding of how the liver's workload shifts with the year. Ayurvedic and traditional Chinese medicine both identify spring as the season most associated with liver function, the organ responsible for processing the dietary changes, environmental exposures, and metabolic transitions that the shift from winter to spring demands. Milk thistle's active compound, silymarin, a complex of flavonolignin concentrated in the seed, is among the most clinically researched hepatoprotective substances in natural medicine. Multiple clinical trials have documented silymarin's ability to normalize elevated liver enzymes in people with alcoholic liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and drug-induced liver damage. The mechanism involves silymarin's ability to stabilize hepatocyte cell membranes against toxic damage, stimulate liver cell regeneration through protein synthesis activation, and reduce inflammation in liver tissue through inhibition of inflammatory signaling pathways. The practical case for growing milk thistle rather than purchasing supplements is primarily economic. Silymarin supplements retail at significant expense. Quality products cost $30 to $60 per month, while a single milk thistle plant produces enough seed for multiple months of supplementation from seed heads that form in summer and are harvested when the white, fluffy pappus begins to appear. The seeds are ground and consumed directly or encapsulated or steeped in hot water for tea. The plant itself grows vigorously in poor, dry soil with almost no attention. It is a biennial that self-seeds reliably, establishing a permanent planting from a single year's sowing. The large marbled leaves with their characteristic white veining are architecturally striking enough that milk thistle functions simultaneously as a medicinal plant and an ornamental specimen. The leaves with spines carefully removed are edible. The midrib of young leaves stripped of spines is used as a celery substitute in some European food traditions, and the young leaves blanched and eaten provide the same silymarin compounds in a food form. Milk thistle, grown from spring sowing and harvested for seed in late summer, produces one of the most clinically validated hepatoprotective substances in natural medicine, from a plant that thrives on exactly the poor, dry, neglected conditions that most garden spaces have in abundance. Valerian's growing cycle makes spring planting strategically important in a way that differs from most medicinal herbs. The root, which contains valerianic acid, isovalerianic acid, and a complex of volatile compounds responsible for the plant's sedative and anxiolytic effects, develops its most medicinally significant potency over a full growing season. A plant established in spring and left to grow through summer and fall produces a root in October or November that is ready to harvest, dry, and use through the winter months when sleep disruption and anxiety most commonly peak. This two-season arc, spring planting, fall harvest, winter use, represents one of the most elegantly timed relationships between a medicinal plant and the human calendar. The clinical research on valerian for sleep has produced results consistent enough across multiple independent trials to generate genuine confidence in its effects. Studies measuring sleep onset latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, and sleep quality scores in participants taking standardized valerian root extract have shown statistically significant improvements compared to placebo, with some studies showing effects comparable to low-dose pharmaceutical sleep aids without the dependence risk or morning sedation that pharmaceutical options carry. The mechanism differs from pharmaceutical sedatives. Rather than directly sedating the central nervous system, valerian compounds appear to modulate GABA availability and reduce the neurological arousal that prevents sleep onset in people with anxiety-driven insomnia. Valerian grows to 4 to 5 feet in height by midsummer, producing white to pale pink flower clusters that attract pollinators heavily through June and July. The flowers carry a surprisingly pleasant fragrance, a vanilla-like quality that bears no resemblance to the strong, characteristic smell of the dried root, which is one of the more pungent substances in the herbal medicine cabinet. The leaves and stems are odorless. It is specifically the drying process that activates the enzymatic conversion, producing valerianic acid from its precursors and generating the characteristic smell. Valerian planted in spring and harvested in fall after a full season of root development is one of the most strategically timed medicinal plants available, producing its most potent therapeutic material precisely when the season most demands what it delivers. St. John's wort occupies a position in botanical medicine that is unusual for a plant people consider gentle and herbal. It has been tested in randomized controlled trials against pharmaceutical antidepressants and produced comparable results for mild to moderate depression in multiple independent studies. The Cochrane collaboration, one of the most rigorous evidence assessment bodies in medicine, reviewed 29 clinical trials involving over 5,000 patients and concluded that St. John's wort was significantly superior to placebo and similarly effective to standard antidepressants for mild to moderate depression with substantially fewer side effects. The active compounds responsible, hypericin and hyperforin, affect serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine reuptake, the same neurotransmitter systems targeted by the most widely prescribed antidepressants, through mechanisms that are still being fully characterized but are clearly pharmacologically active. Spring planting is essential because the flowers, the medicinally most active part of the plant, bloom around the summer solstice, the traditional harvest time observed across European herbal traditions for centuries. The buds and newly opened flowers harvested at peak bloom and infused in olive oil produce the vivid red oil that traditional herbalists used as a quality indicator, the red color coming from hypericin extracting into the oil, a visual confirmation of medicinal content. Applied topically, St. John's wort oil has documented anti-inflammatory and nerve-supporting effects that make it useful for muscle soreness, bruising, and the nerve pain associated with conditions like sciatica. The herb-drug interactions that accompany St. John's wort are real and significant. The plant induces cytochrome P450 enzymes in the liver, accelerating the metabolism of numerous medications, including oral contraceptives, blood thinners, HIV medications, and other antidepressants, reducing their effectiveness. This is not a reason to avoid the plant, but a reason to approach it with accurate information and, for anyone on prescription medications, consultation with a healthcare provider before use. St. John's wort planted in spring and harvested at midsummer bloom is one of the most evidence-supported botanical interventions for mood available from any plant. A resource that grows in poor soil, spreads through rhizomes once established, and produces year after year from a single planting. Peppermint is the medicinal herb that most people already have somewhere in their lives, in tea bags, in toothpaste, in the mint sauce at Sunday dinner, without recognizing the degree to which the plant behind those products is doing genuine pharmacological work. Menthol, the primary active compound, interacts with cold-sensitive receptors in mucous membranes, which explains both its cooling sensation and its effectiveness for the upper respiratory congestion that spring allergies produce in a significant portion of the population. Inhaling steam from a cup of peppermint tea or from a bowl of hot water with a few drops of peppermint oil mechanically loosens congestion through a receptor interaction that pharmaceutical decongestants address through a different mechanism with significantly more side effects. For digestive complaints, the clinical research is specific enough to appear in medical guidelines. Enteric-coated peppermint oil capsules, which deliver menthol to the lower digestive tract rather than releasing it in the stomach, have been validated in multiple clinical trials for irritable bowel syndrome, with a meta-analysis of 9 trials showing statistically significant improvement in overall IBS symptom scores compared to placebo. Spring is when IBS and digestive disruption frequently peak, as dietary patterns shift and stress responses adjust to seasonal changes. For tension headaches, applying diluted peppermint oil to the temples produces measurable pain reduction through menthol's ability to inhibit serotonin receptors and increase local circulation, a mechanism documented in a controlled trial that compared peppermint oil application to paracetamol for tension headache with comparable results. Growing peppermint for medicinal use requires only that it be contained, in a pot or in a bed with buried barriers, because the plant's spreading habit, while making it nearly impossible to fail with, also makes it genuinely invasive in open soil. Fresh peppermint leaves used for tea deliver significantly more volatile compounds than dried or commercial preparations, making a living plant more therapeutically useful than any packaged product. Peppermint contained in a pot and used fresh delivers one of the most broadly applicable medicinal profiles available from any herb, effective for the respiratory, digestive, and pain challenges that spring most commonly produces from a plant that is functionally impossible to kill. Mint closes the respiratory and digestive section of this list, but the herb that closes the list itself, the one that ties together what spring asks for most comprehensively, is rosemary, whose medicinal profile extends further than its culinary reputation suggests, and whose combination of cognitive support, antioxidant activity, and circulatory stimulation makes it one of the most broadly useful herbs for the energy and mental clarity demands that spring's return to activity places on the body. The research on rosemary's cognitive effects is specific. 1. 8-cineol, one of the primary volatile compounds released by the plant, has been measured in the bloodstream of participants who spent time in a rosemary-scented room, and those with higher blood plasma levels of the compound performed measurably better on cognitive speed and accuracy tests. This is not an aromatherapy placebo effect. The compound moves from the air into the blood and produces measurable changes in brain function that have been replicated across multiple research groups. Carnosic acid and rosmarinic acid, Rosemary's primary antioxidant compounds show among the highest radical scavenging activity measured in any culinary herb, providing systemic antioxidant protection that supports the cellular renewal processes that spring's metabolic shift is already initiating. The circulatory stimulating effects of rosemary, documented in research on topical and internal preparations, support the return of energy and physical capacity that the transition from winter's reduced activity demands. Spring planting in zones 7 and above establishes rosemary as a permanent perennial that produces for decades. In colder zones, an annual replanting from cuttings or a purchased plant brought indoors for winter keeps the medicinal resource continuously available. Rosemary grown where its fragrance is encountered daily, near a door, beside a path, in a pot by a window, delivers its documented cognitive and antioxidant support passively and continuously, making it the plant that most efficiently closes the gap between what spring asks of the body and what these 15 herbs together provide. Spring doesn't wait for preparation. The herbs that support the body's seasonal transition, the ones that address the allergy burden, the liver's shifting load, the nervous system's adjustment to longer days, the immune system's recalibration, are available to anyone willing to plant them now. They don't require expertise or elaborate gardens or expensive equipment. They require a pot or a patch of ground and the recognition that the most direct path between the body and what it needs has always run through the plant kingdom. Grow something this spring, not because the tradition says to, but because the evidence, examined honestly, shows that what ancient cultures reached for at this time of year was reaching for something real. If this kind of content speaks to you, subscribing keeps you here for everything coming next. There's a full season of this ahead.